Our guest for this session of the Mindset Shift is Pat Stephenson, founder and chief relationship officer at Boys and Girls, a branded entertainment agency. Pat has led an astonishing career in advertising, having started off in the early 2000s working for Ogilvy's. He then moved on to McConnell's Advertising, where he held leadership positions for over 7 years. After the crash of '09, he decided to venture off and co-founded his own agency, Boys and Girls, who now work with some of the biggest brands both in Ireland and on a global scale. Pat, welcome to the Mindset Shift. Great to have you joining us today.
Well, listen, thank you so much for having me. I'm really looking forward to having this chat with you, Tim.
And in this series, we want to find out about you. You know, we obviously will chat to you about your business and your successes and the challenges that, you know, you've enjoyed along the way and you've experienced along the way. But tell me a little bit about yourself first.
Well, I'm born in Dublin, second generation Dubliner. Both my folks are from here, and I'm the eldest of four kids. So I kind of, ended up having to break all those rules on the way through, so that all the rest of them could have an easier path. My dad was an auctioneer, and my mum was a housewife, and I think, very much there was a really solid work ethic and attitude in the house. So even from a very early age, we were kind of encouraged to go out there and earn a few bob. And, at the age of, 14, you were kind of kicked out the door to try and pick up a bit of work, whatever else. And I often think that's, at the time, I wasn't so sure about it, but I often think now that it was probably the best thing that ever happened to me. So, it was a great childhood. I'm still very close with all my family. But yeah, like those kind of, whether it was cutting grass or getting the first job working in a garage pumping petrol or working in a bar or a restaurant, all those things, I certainly feel a very kind of strong sense of value towards now.
And you said you're the eldest of four, so was it, who are the other siblings, boys or girls?
I've got two sisters and a brother. Yeah. So I'm the one, obviously, that they all look up to greatly. No, I'm joking. Yeah, but no, there's a great similarity to us, and I think probably the same with a lot of families. You find once you have the opportunity to get together again, you revert back to your type. It's like whether one is the peacemaker and one is the joke maker, and a couple of troublemakers probably thrown in there in the middle.
And what was the age gap between you and the youngest?
10 years. So, and actually, we often talk about the childhood that I would have had would have been very different to my brother. So, growing up in the 80s, and I'm sure you probably remember, there was a lot of very lean years, incredible interest rates and all of that kind of stuff. And things like summer holidays were limited. Like there was the year we went to Bray for the day. My dad happened to know a fella who owned the arcade in there, and he lent us a bag of 10 pieces, and we went to town, whereas my brother would have been, not to say that we didn't go on holidays, but he would have been more used to, say, the holiday to France and all that kind of stuff. So but I think we were both very happy at the end of it, and I certainly wouldn't swap any of it around.
It's interesting to see a contrast in just a 10-year cycle, because as you say, the day in Bray, and getting the 10 penny pieces, for the slots and to get you into the amusements. Contrast that with your brother's experience from the same family. I always find that fascinating, Pat.
But my sister Danielle, she's only 2 years younger than me. She was much smarter than I was. So I would be there like flinging the money into the thing, whereas she was playing the little the coin slotty things where the money, and anything she made she put in her pocket. She was obviously a much better businesswoman than I was.
You mentioned your dad was an auctioneer. What type of businessman was he? For you at a young age.
Oh God, well, I don't like. I have such strong memories of being in the office, and I guess when you're self-employed as he was, and he had to take over from his dad became ill, and he ended up having to take over his company, which was, well, without getting into too much detail, was in quite a bit of trouble. And so he started working there at 21, and he took it over at 24. Which, when I think about it now, at 24, I was barely able to tie my own shoelaces. So, we had great exposure to a lot of different things, whether it was, he used to do the auctions for the guards. So secondhand bikes or the cars, or you'd be going into some house, whatever, and all the content to be cleared out. So you were in and around interesting people. I had a granduncle who works in the business as well. And I was just fascinated by the fact that he could know so much about so many different things. an antique chair, a table, a clock, seemingly very different ephemera, but he had that thing. So like, we had really great exposure to a whole host of different backgrounds, and not all of it was like, I remember going to there was a couple of sales, that might have been a bit difficult for whoever was selling it, and you'd get that sense of tension in or around the place. So it was a great childhood, And on my mum's side, her dad had been a publican. They sold it when I was born. I'm not sure if that was in celebration or whatever else, but yeah. So we had a really interesting kind of mix growing up.
And you said mom was a housewife, so she obviously worked in the home. In the modern world, that many mothers have to go and work. How would you contrast that with your experience with your mom being in home? So when you're coming in from school, I assume your mom is there. When you're coming in from sport or whatever, your mom is there. Was that a very different experience?
Sorry, different to what we experience now. Yeah, well, yeah, it is. Like I probably took it a little bit for granted, that she gave up so much for the four of us, but no, it was super. Like, in terms of whether we're doing sport or any other activities, she was always there to kind of help, and even especially when you're hitting those teenage years, the fridge was always full, which is always very important. But like, obviously, like, my wife now, she works. She's a full time work. She's a solicitor, and we just have to juggle it. But then you have a bit of home help or whatever else in terms of someone to help out picking up the kids and that kind of stuff. So it's like there's pros and cons, I think, to both the situations.
Where did you go to school? Primary school first?
I went to Gonzaga in Ranelagh, would you believe? Yeah. So there was my dad had been to a Jesuit school, and he was very keen on getting me in, and somehow I managed to pass the exam to get in there. Skin of my teeth, I'd imagine. So yeah, I went to junior school there, and then carried on into the secondary school. The junior school's gone at this stage, but yeah, it was a brilliant place. Like, you were exposed to a whole host of different types of thinking. Not that I knew it at the time, but and people from very different backgrounds. I think that we were looking at the kind of the mix of people that were in the class. It's a bit of a lottery at the same time, but and some really brilliant teachers who encouraged various different things across the years.
So let's tease that out a little bit, Pat. So you're saying you to mix with different people of different experiences. You're the eldest in the family, so therefore you get the first experience of everything as the eldest. Okay, good, bad, and indifferent. Yeah. How did you find we talk about second level and that mixing with others? How was that comfortable for you? Was it easy for you, or was it something you had to work at?
I think you always have to work on it. Like, I would have been both outgoing and very shy, if that makes any sense at all. So like, my dad had a friend who had a video camera, and I remember one of my birthday parties I think it was my fifth or sixth, is captured there, for posterity, for better or for worse. And looking back, and it's just this like loudmouth, brat is probably the politest word I can put to it. But I remember, all having said that, all the going through school and stuff, that like you're constantly find yourself with people who have different interests and different environments and all that kind of stuff. And yeah, like I guess it's probably the same with everyone. But let's say football. I was terrible at sport, and essentially when you're in junior school, your entire, like, inverted commas, coolness or acceptability is down to your sporting credentials. So when you have two left feet, as I did, like A for effort and F for ability. So but then you find a different way around, and maybe a sense of humor or just a sense of positivity can kind of carry you through a lot of situations.
I'm interested about the point about outgoing and shy, because that's a contradiction, that people might believe, but it can be so true and so often in so many ways, that we can look at people and say, oh my God, he's very confident or she's very confident, and inside they can be exceptionally shy.
Yeah.
How did you overcome that? Because that's a challenge. That is a real challenge, Pat.
I think it is just from experience. Like, if I think back even to, say, in junior school and a bit then in secondary school, like things like, you had to do like a play, at the end of the year, and you'd have to, in front of your peers or else get in front of, and I really enjoyed it, but I also really dreaded it. And but doing it, for those number of years, or there was a debating thing that you had to do in school, or you were certainly very much encouraged to do. And I liked the public speaking thing, but I found, going up there and dying a couple of times, the rest of the time was terrible, again, you get used to it. And as with any of these things, like, even if I think back to my career, I remember working in McConnell's with, say, someone like John Fanning, and going, how could anyone ever stand up and be able to talk so loquaciously and expertly about something that they've, probably not spent all that much time with? And but it comes down to, I think, just practice and experience. So like, definitely, as I said, having a couple of those more difficult situations and then, living through them is probably the best way to learn.
You mentioned that you had an A for effort in sport and an F for performance, we'll call it. But did you, like, was sport a part of your life? Were you into sport? I mean, obviously, Gonzaga is a big sporting school, so therefore.
Well, it wasn't at the time, I'll tell you.
Okay.
Jesus, we were bet every day. Like, rugby was the main sport, and there was a bit of football then during the summertime. But no, like, I managed to get on one of the school rugby teams and all that kind of stuff because I was very determined and I was a big lump. But I absolutely love sport. It was probably later on in life, I still play things like tag rugby and the odd game of five-a-side football if you're really, really stuck for a player. But I love sport because of what it gives you in terms of when you're in a team, that commitment to your other teammates is, I think, a really important. I'm not sure if you'd call it a skill or just a life experience, and also that, like, so that's in terms of what you learn, and then in terms of the enjoyment factor. I think nothing replicates the sense of total immersion or flow or whatever you want it, as being involved in just in the game and in the moment. You're not thinking about anything. Your brain is operating on a totally different level. Sometimes your body's operating at a different level to your brain, but I love it, and like, I'll keep playing some form of sport as long as I can.
It's interesting you talk about the fact that you said you had 2 left feet, but yet you managed to walk through that and eventually get a place on a team. And when I talk to people about sports, I make the point that, I love honest players. I love people who are just honest. Everybody can't be the most skillful. It's just not reality. But the people who are honest, in many cases, get more out of themselves than sometimes the people who had the skill who are less honest. Was that ever an experience you saw in your world?
Oh yeah, no, definitely. Like, I had to work really, really hard to be, just below par. But I think, I think that's one of the reasons I did get on a rugby team. It was only a junior cup rugby team, or whatever, but was because I just worked my socks off, and even I got glandular fever in that year, and it was, you'd work very hard to get on a team, and then you were sick. But I worked my way back into it, and I think, I probably have some little pride in that, and albeit that we got beaten in the first round, but that didn't matter, Yeah.
Yeah, you should have great pride in that, Pat. Losing in the first round is just a result that these things happen.
Exactly.
But the fact that you recovered from glandular fever is a great sign of courage, I would call it, and desire to get back, because you weren't the most talented player there, but what you were is one of the most honest players. And it's a great lesson for people who will watch this. Sometimes even in our professional world, we look at others and we with a lens of how skillful they are, how good they are at their job. And I would always say to people, just do the best job you can do. That's all you're asked to do. If you do that, you'll be okay.
Yeah, the skill thing is really, I think, it's not an irrelevance, but it's not. It is all about the endeavor that you put into something. And I think, your word honesty is a word probably I don't choose very much, but I think it's so important in terms of how you apply yourself. Like, so if you're really honest in terms of, say, your client relationships, or more importantly, maybe your how you're working with people that you work with in an agency, I think people respond to that, and the opposite, if they will smell out any level of dishonesty or some kind of duplicitousness,
And if you think of the Junior Cup game, the first round game, your teammates find that out as well about you. Back then, like, all they want, in my experience, when you're playing in the team, is for you to give your best, whatever that happens to be. So that honesty for me has always been something I've always felt was important for me personally, but I've always felt was important in the business sense, with your colleagues and with in your world with your clients.
Yeah,
tell me about college then. You come to the end of second level and you go to college. So where did you end up in college? Did you leave the big city of Dublin and head off to the wilderness?
I went miles away, Tim. I went all the way up the road to UCD. like I was I worked hard for my leaving cert, and I only did grand, if you know what I mean. My handwriting is still appalling or whatever else. So I did okay, and I decided I wanted to do psychology at the time. I thought there was kind of an interesting aspect to it in terms of I was always very interested in people, and I felt as if to understand them more could be of benefit in direct to psychology or maybe to business. I'm not sure I necessarily thought that clearly through at the time, but anyway, that was certainly in my thoughts. So I went to do that in UCD, and as it turned out, I hated it. So it was part of the arts faculty, which was very lucky because you have to pick three subjects in first year. So I did psychology, history, and Greek and Roman civilization, and the psychology. I just remember sitting in a lecture in first year, about halfway through the year, it was December or January, and they're doing a lecture on the history of psychology, and they were kind of basically the theme of the lecture was, I'm not intentionally or not, was in the 1930s they thought this, ha ha ha. In the 1940s they thought this, ha ha ha. 50s. They got to 1960s, and I was like, that's 30 years ago. Like, am I going to be sitting here and doing this lecture in 30 years' time? They're going, what I'm learning now is bunkum. And so it really, that was a real sharpening moment. I'm sure there was lots of other determining factors, more maths than I would have liked. So I focused on the history and Greek and Roman, but also I think for me in college was a real benefit to me. Like I learned so much about myself and what I'm interested in and what maybe I am, had an application for, not necessarily through the subjects I was doing, but more through some of the people I met in the societies and stuff like that I got involved in. Because I was from Dublin and I was going to UCD, I was really determined not to just hang out with all the same friends and stuff I had from school, who were still good friends and everything, but I wanted to really broaden my view of the world as much as possible. So doing things like Dramsoc and all that kind of thing like that, meeting just loads of people and understanding a little bit more about what made me tick was the real long-term benefit.
So with the three subjects, did you drop psychology or did you have to?
Okay. Yeah, I dropped it. You see, I had to focus on either one or two when you go into second year. So I dropped psychology and did history and Greek and Roman. And I love them. And like, I still have a real interest in history. I always have. And Greek and Roman was something I've always been, even as a kid, I was really interested in. So they were great. Maybe they didn't expand my mind as much as, something entirely new might have, but I really enjoy them. And no, don't ask me to recount exactly what I was learning back in 1994 to 97, but I got a lot out of it at the time,
So I'm fascinated with history as well, Pat. So, and different, I suppose, events that have happened. When you look back at both of those civilizations, from a point of view where you are today, what were the things they were good at? Take the Romans, who dominated the world at one point, and the Greeks dominated another. What were they really good at? If you kind of look back and say, what could I learn today from what they were really good at? What would anything jump off the page to you?
Well, I think in terms, in particular, of the Grecian kind of, and obviously there's loads of different schools of philosophy that come out of it. I think their understanding of how we can and should interact as a society in its true sense of the word are probably the things I would carry with me most. Like this idea that as individuals, we can and should work towards a collective betterment. I think that's something that is maybe that falls outside of, like the traditional narrow caste, inverted commas, Western American democracy. So, I think a lot of the philosophy that comes through there is really strong to me. And often, just even in terms of the Roman history in particular, I often think back to, like when you're looking at how prosperous we are now and all the great travails that are in going on in the world, is this the end of another cycle? Will it end like it did the Roman Empire? I don't know. I'm an optimist. I think that, there's probably enough checks and balances in terms of how we progress as a society. But I think the idea that, we can continue as we were and for things not to decline is very foolhardy. And I think, look at things like COVID-19. There's obviously been, there's a lot of bad stuff that have come out of it, and it's been a difficult year. But I think what it has done is probably forced a lot of larger questions in terms of how we want to live as people and as a society. So I think hopefully something that might actually get us to think a little bit broader. I think it's long-winded answer there.
No, I think it's a brilliant point, Pat, about, we say, the Roman society, that if we think things will stay the same and we don't do something to improve it,
Oh,
it's very easily lost. And I think that's in the
nuts. Yeah.
business sense today. We have challenges with COVID and we have other challenges, but just even outside of the COVID challenge, businesses need to constantly look at themselves to how they can improve just a little all the time, just a little improvement all the time. Because if we don't keep improving, then the danger is that, as in
Yeah.
two civilizations, they just get lost.
Well, it's a layered thing as well, because obviously you need to look at how your business is going to improve from a commercial perspective, but also think in terms of a business will only really succeed if you're really invested in it personally in terms of your thing. And I think if you're not growing, if it's not growing, both those things are very tied in together. If you ever get bored with like the business, I think it's already dead. So I think that in terms of the skill sets that you're offering as an individual and as an organization, I think it's really important that they kind of keep evolving. And I think also as well, like, it's worth looking at obviously the small step change improvements that you can look at, but also looking at, like there was a great question, I remember reading, and I'd love to give it to its rightful owner, but I can't remember. It was about 11 years ago when we were set up, and it was try and build a business that will put your business out of business. And I think it's a great question or ways to think, so if you were looking at a model that would take over or could eat your lunch, to use that cliched expression, what business could that be? And then I suppose how would you gradually move your business towards that as an exercise?
And it's a great question, because what that does is that it first of all forces you starting out your business to look at what could happen down the future. Secondly, it forces you building your business to be constantly growing yourself, which is something that unfortunately not everybody just makes that decision to do that. And the third thing, it makes sure that you've got to develop your people and you've got to grow your people. So, all those questions get answered as part of that journey if that ultimate success becomes available to you. So let's just jump back a bit to your college. So you said, I was fascinated with your college. You said you love college because, you didn't just mix with your friends in Dublin or Dublin people. You got a broader experience, which, set you up for just different understandings.
Yeah.
When you left college, what was your sort of ambition? I mean, you've left with a degree in history and Greek and Roman, civilization.
The world is my oyster, Tim, at that stage, right? No, so as I said to you, I think the reason I felt as if I got so much out of college was doing things like, say, getting involved in society. So I did a bit of, like, I don't know what you would refer to, like presenting, where you were, like I would talk in lectures with regard to maybe different subject matters. And then also I was acting, and I was okay at acting, but I was doing a bit of writing, which I really enjoyed. So I looked at that and I went, what is there out there that I'm interested in that I could maybe combine some of these things that I'm also seem to have an interest and aptitude in that could be a job? And advertising kind of came to mind. So that advertising kind of crystallized in my head then at that stage as a career that I wanted to do. I wanted to try, and there was a course in DIT, which is still running today. And I wanted to get into that, and I applied for it, and I didn't get into it. Which was a bit disappointing. And basically they said, look, you whatever, you don't get much feedback. But I kind of, between the jigs and the reels, I wanted to go in and be a copywriter, and I didn't have a portfolio or a book because I'd gone literally straight from college into the application for it. So I took that on the chin, and I was pretty young at that stage. I was only 21 or 2, or whatever age I was. So I decided I'd do some work. I worked in a coffee shop and ended up managing that, which is great crack. Really enjoy work. I love working in that kind of industry. But then I kind of did it and built a book, which if I was to show it to you now would be a podcast in and of itself in terms of embarrassment. But I really applied myself. I read as much literature as possible. I met a couple of people in order to try and understand, because you don't know anything really about the industry, right? You just don't have a clue. But I think I put enough effort in, and I built enough of something in order for me to at least get into the course. So I got into that advertising course, and I both loved and hated the course, because the course, it was the first year, it was a master's, and there was a lot of things wrong with it, but it exposed me to great people and great thinking and great work. So yeah, it was super.
So again, I use this word courage and honesty, that, you didn't get in the first time, but you went off and built a coffee shop and worked in a coffee shop, but you
I
still
didn't build, so I just helped out managing there. But yeah. But I
no, but
loved it.
you built your experience in there.
Oh yes, sorry, yes, yeah.
And but you paid the price to learn up. We'd use the word today, upskill. To give yourself a chance to get back, and then you get back and to do it. And so you're now finished. You have now done your college careers is over. And advertising, you said, was something that interested you? Was that your first entry, or did you?
Yeah. And so, like, genuinely at that stage, like, I'd always loved advertising. This an entertaining synthesis of what's going on in culture that has a commercial message at the heart of it. Like, what's not to like? I was always intrigued with it, even as a kid. And weirdly, I remember doing one of these aptitude courses that you do through school or whatever else, and it actually, I only found it recently. I only found this like 6 years ago when my mum was moving, and it had advertising as the course at start. And I obviously totally discounted it because, when it was nowhere near my CAO at that stage. But once I left college and I had that kind of in my mind, so I went from there. So yeah, it was like I was really, really determined to get in there. I knew I'd enjoy it. I thought I could be good at it. Obviously, maybe the follies of youth or whatever else. So I applied to get in the course, and as I said, just met some really great people in there. Yeah.
So where was your first point of entry into the advertising world?
So I was on the course with a number of different people, and there was a fellow I clicked with called Donald Douglas, and the two of us ended up doing kind of freelance copywriting. I wanted to be a writer, was the thing. So that was my path. I was going to be this amazing pun writing copywriter. So the two of us actually, we ended up doing some freelance work, and actually we were doing okay. We were picking this work. I had the unfortunate thing of having a girlfriend at that stage who decided she wanted to go traveling, and I liked her enough that I wanted to go traveling. This is now my wife, so it wasn't a bad bet. So we went off traveling, and when I came back, I was like, right, okay, so what am I going to do? I need a job. Any money I'd saved had gone plus a few hundred more, right? And I came back, and Brian Ross, who ran the account services or client services side of the course, had always been very good to me and very nice to me. I basically, when I came back in, I was like, look, I didn't have a network, so who do I know? Brian, right? So going to meet him in college, he was like, oh, well, actually, weirdly, my friend John Keaveney is looking for an account executive in Ogilvy. Would you do an interview with him? So I, dickied up the CV that had, very little experience on it. If you needed a sandwich made or a cup of coffee, it was good on that front, pumping your petrol. But I did an interview with him, with John, and I was lucky enough to get a position in Ogilvy, and I was back in 2000. So yeah, it was great times.
So just tell me, let's just go back to this trip with your wife, your girlfriend at the time.
Yeah.
How long were you away for?
It was the best. We went in November. We were back in March. So it was 4.5 months or something like that, and we went through South America. We realized when we were in South America that actually there was a stop off in Tahiti, which was one of these unscheduled stops between South America on the way to Australia. So we managed to get to Tahiti for a bit, and then we were in Australia where we met her in-laws. We had New Year's for the Millennium in Sydney, which was incredible, and then Southeast Asia. So it was an incredible experience, and again, obviously the benefit of travel is multitudinous, but for me it was just, again, I had lived a relatively sheltered Irish Dublin life, and just to see and get a sense of the world in a broader remit was of just incredible value. And also these things, you have time and you're being stimulated with all of this new sight, sound, smells, food, people, cultures, places. It's incredible. But also it was having the benefit of, because we were backpacking and we were on buses all the time, I generally end up, she'd be sleeping on my shoulder and I'd have a book, whatever, and just reading all the time. So taking the time, I read just a ton of brilliant, stimulating books that again have kind of sort of stuck with me. So it was just everything. It was a tremendous trip.
You mentioned Sydney for the Millennium. The New Year must have been fascinating. What else would have stood out amongst that trip for you? I mean, you mentioned the bus and your girlfriend sleeping on your shoulder while you could read, but when you think of the people, the cultures, the diversity that you experienced, sort of what would stand out to you looking back now, as you say, from a sheltered Irish background, you're now thrust into this, amazing world, but it's a very different world. What would have stood out as a sort of a real highlight other than the Sydney one, or just the experience?
There is too many to pull out one. But yeah, even in South America alone, when we arrived in Buenos Aires, which is a super place to kind of stop because it does have that kind of European feel, but it's slightly different. So as a transition point in, and we had a couple of friends there. So, you're there and you're out for these amazing meals and just the kind of the vibrancy of the city. We went up north, Iguazu Falls, where they filmed The Mission, like one of the greatest, most natural, beautiful things you could ever lay your eyes on. Then all the way over into Chile and into Peru, just like everywhere you went, there was something that you'd never experienced before, and whether that's going over the Andes or Machu Picchu, or all these kind of and in some ways they've become a bit of a cliched, maybe tourist trailer of us, but Jesus, that wasn't the way I was thinking when I was going. These are just all amazing places. Going to Tahiti, like I'd never been to anywhere like this. I thought these kind of tropical places only existed in cartoons and movies, and there I was sitting in this place, eating my first ever mango. On a beach watching the sunset, paradise, absolute paradise. It was amazing. Safety to everything. In Vietnam, it was just a blast,
And then you leave that paradise feeling, and you settle in with O&M. So, how did you find your entry into that world? Because now you're in the real world. You're now earning your money from this profession. So, tell me about your time there.
Yeah, well, so as I said, John Keaveney was the fellow who kind of hired me. Now, weirdly, he ended up not being my direct manager. I had a couple of other fellas in there, and I was only talking about this last week. Weirdly enough, so when I arrived in there, I was well rested. I was well stimulated. I was relatively confident. And I didn't have a great first 3 months, right? So I learned loads of lessons in my time in Ogilvy, and I met some really great people there. But the first lesson was one that I learned through kind of bad experience, which is doesn't matter how smart you are or think you are or whatever else. If you haven't looked after the basics, no one wants to listen to you. So as I mentioned, my handwriting and all that kind of stuff has never been particularly great, and so you're filling in like countless forms and chitties and all that kind of stuff as an AE. This is prehistoric for everyone else who doesn't remember pre-computers and all that kind of stuff. And whilst it was getting done, maybe it wasn't necessarily done as well as it was. And I was hired at the same time as two other account executives. And what I found out subsequently, there was only going to be 2 permanent positions. So I was lucky enough that after they had a frank conversation 3 months in, we're not sure. And that booked me up, I'll tell you, in terms of really on the attitude. And so if lesson 1 is, detail is everything, and the oil that drives the engine, the 2 was putting your hand up, because I had a good fortune is probably one way to look at it. They were organizing a big corporate event, a golf competition, and they were looking for people to help out with that. And I put my hand up and helped. And there was one of those things whereby it seems like a trite, non-important event, but actually being there and working to get everything set up, and meeting some of the people within the organization who would have been, very senior to you that you wouldn't know, and making a positive impression, all that stuff, made them think, oh, well, actually, maybe this guy isn't, cretin or whatever else they were thinking at the time. So it was really valuable. And then I was really lucky in there that I had a couple of people then who did believe in me, and Aircell was the big client that they had at the time. And I ended up working on the transition to Vodafone because the account director was off getting married, as someone who'd only had like a year or 18 months worth of experience. So those kind of things, obviously there's a luck, and there's also getting yourself in the right position. But Ogilvy was a great place for getting like experience beyond where maybe you should be. It really should be in good stead.
You mentioned luck, and we all need luck. There's no doubt, whether it's in sport or in business or in life, we all need luck along the way. But it's what you do when you get the luck is really what separates you. And you had called out that your first 3 months in O&M was just basically not as successful as you had expected it to be, or maybe took for granted as it would be. But you got through that, and you put your hand up and went to that corporate event and started to pay the price, as I would describe it, to do things to get you there. But the key is to take the look when you get the opportunity. So you get the air sale account. So tell me, I mean, obviously it's a big account at the time, and how did you deal with that? Because that's a really big gig for you to have got now.
Yeah, no, it was, yeah, and again, it was just so there was an element of timing, as I said. The girl who was brilliant was looking after, but she was off getting married when, so it was one of these weird ones where everyone knew their sale was going to become Vodafone at some stage, but there was no word, and it was literally there was an email in to the MD on I think a Thursday evening, and it was 4 weeks between now and you've got to launch it, and I think we had to spend 3 or 4 million quid worth of media. That was being handled by the guys in Cara. So I did what I could in terms of I worked really hard in Oregon to try and get the entire organization, laid out, and I leaned on people that I'd built up good relationships with. So, I had a good relationship with the head of production, and a good relationship with the head of client management, and a good relationship with the creatives. And I had to utilize all of those relationships as much as possible, because there was absolutely no way that I, as one individual with the experience that I had, could have come anywhere near trying to deliver that. But I was lucky that I suppose I'd spent the time, building those relationships within the organization. And even, I know Alan Cox has been on this before. I think that I met him for the first time on that project, and he was just brilliant in terms of, he could see the lie of the land, and I always think that how people treat and behave around, inverted commas, junior members of staff is a really great indicator of the type of character they are. And I have to say he was fantastic in that environment, as were many others. But
it's a couple of great lessons there for people. First of all, treat people at all levels properly. Okay, treat people at all levels fairly and respect at all levels. Secondly, you're thrust into this real opportunity. It's a 4-week window. It needs to get delivered. Just you said 3 or 4 million was the media spend with Cara. So this is a big piece of work that you have to do, and you had the foresight to ask others to help you. That really is a great lesson for me, Pat. That sometimes when we get something like this, an opportunity like this, we feel at times we have to do it all. And you've just explained to us there the benefit of, not trying to do it all, sharing it with others, getting others to help you, calling your relationships, and ultimately that's what proved to be successful. Is that a fair assessment of what you just said?
Yeah, absolutely it is. Yeah, and look, you make it sound really like it was very thought out and predetermined in my head, but a lot of it was instinctual as well. I guess going back a bit, working as a kid in restaurants, bars, petrol stations, all that kind of stuff, I'd learned from an early enough age that you really need to establish good relationships with your work environment to get anything done. Like from a positive, in a positive sense in terms of like productivity, but also from a protectionist sense in terms of if there is someone who's acting the maggot or else. So I learned that very early on, and it's also something I love people, and I love dealing with people. Like relationships are, I won't say my bread and butter because that makes sense, but relationships are what I really enjoy in terms of of my working life. So building those things probably came maybe a little bit more natural to me because it's what I enjoyed. But but you're right, I couldn't have done any of it without all of them.
There's no doubt. I was saying that is people want to know that you care before they care what you know. And if you really care about people at all levels, they'll have your back when you need them. They'll pull out the extra stops for you on the days that you need to do it, and they'll just be there for you in different situations. But you then decided to move on from O&M after a period of time.
I did, yeah. So I was in Ogilvy, and I was, having a great time, and I progressed up to account director level and all that kind of stuff, which was super. And I got a phone call from Jarlath Jennings, who was the MD of McConnell's. And McConnell's at the time were, there was McConnell's and then there was the rest of the agencies. Just, I suppose, from a planning and a strategic and a creative perspective, they were it. They had all the accounts, and I was very flattered. My negotiation skills were put to the limit in terms of making the move. Which is another podcast again. But finally, we agreed, and I made the move to McConnell's, which was like Ogilvy was great, big international network, and you learn a lot working on those kind of things. But McConnell's, just I was surrounded by brilliant people, absolutely brilliant people. It was tremendous, you know.
Talk to me about your negotiation skills.
Well, so anyway, Jarlath, rest in peace. And myself and Jarlath got on very well. He rang me up, and basically what had happened was JP, who had been my boss, I think had a cup of coffee with Jarlath, and then they got chatting. And JP must have said something positive about me anyway, because Jarlath was on the phone pretty soon afterwards, wanting to know if I want to make the move. Mental note: don't discuss good members of the staff with your rivals. But anyway, and without getting into the figures, Jarlath rang me up and he said, "Would you be interested in moving?" And I was like, "Well, it depends. Try not to shake your head too much." And the first offer was about 2/3 of my current salary. And like this was obviously my first move. Like I hadn't moved from a place to place, but I knew that wasn't necessarily correct. I was lucky that there was a fella, Mark, who was in Ogilvy, who had been in McConnell's, and he was much older. Sorry, I think he was probably 5 or 6 years older than me, but at the time it seems like a world of experience, and he knew the place. So I managed to get it to a stage where it was just about acceptable, and I guess he knew I knew that I wanted to make the move in terms of just like it at that stage, and it's probably hard for people to kind of look at it now, but they were just so far ahead of everyone else. I just really wanted that experience, and I was young enough to not hold on for too much rubles, but I got them in the end.
I'm glad to hear that you got them in the end. You obviously had a successful time there, and then you decided to set up, co-found your own world. So talk to me about that move from, the comfort you had grown successfully in your role, and you were moving on nicely. You got them in the end, as you say, but you then decided, look, I want to do something myself. So just talk me through that particular moment about making those decisions.
Well, it's a whole confluence of things, right? So I'd always wanted to do my own thing in terms of an agency. It was just always something that was really attractive to me. And I suppose across my career, like Rory, out of my co-founders, was who I met first. He was a brother of a really good friend of mine, so I knew him then. And then we ended up working in Ogilvy together, and we worked really well. Like he was a sous who became a creative, and I was a wannabe creative who became a sous. So, and look, we still going very well. And I suppose sort of we'd always had this kind of like ongoing chat about wanting to do something together. And then in McConnell's, I've been working very well with the likes of Patrick, Margaret, Chris, and Fiona, and I'd had a kind of a conversation with a couple of them, and then some of the others had a conversation with me about maybe doing something. And I just felt like the time was right insofar as, like, I've always had this view that a recession is probably the best time to have a punt at setting up a business, because I mean, what made sense to me was that you're to put it in really blunt terms, your costs are never going to be as low in terms of setting up, whether that's property or whatever else. And then I just had the same thing that if we were good enough, which we believe we were, that you'd have more opportunities to maybe prove it at a time of recession as well, because other clients are looking for maybe something new or novel or whatever else. And if anything, I was just maybe surprised at the time that not more agencies kind of started up, whatever else. So we started up in 2009, and it was great. Like, sorry, in terms of impetus, I had an unusual situation whereby I had handed in my notice. I found out my wife was pregnant about 2 or 3 weeks after that. And then a month later, found out it was twins. So that was a real, you get this right, fella. It's nothing quite like having a good pressure point or target to hit. But yeah, like it's been I can't actually believe it's been 11 years. It's just, I don't know if that's old age or whatever, but it's just flown. And when I think back, like I'm really, I shouldn't be saying, I'm really proud of the work that we've done, and the results that we've brought for clients, and the length of a lot of our client relationships. It's been tremendous. I really enjoyed it.
Obviously, your wife expecting twins, that's great motivation, particularly, as you said, at the start of that journey. And it's also interesting
Jesus.
that it was a recession. It was the financial crash that just happened, and, there was a big recession coming down the track. When you look back over the 11 years today, what are the things that you're proud of? You should be proud of that success, because it is success. But what are the things that really make you very proud when you think about those 11 years in this conversation?
I think fundamentally that we set out to try and make really good work, not on a one-off or a one client basis, but for all clients at all times. And I genuinely think that we've done that. Like hand on heart, I'm not going to go into now. I can think of probably two projects that I'm not proud of over the course of the whole 11 years. I think we've really tried to always push for better work, because we believe that, again, if you get the strategy right and you come up with that proposition and you deliver it in the most creative way possible, that's going to get the best return on investment for your client's money. So that's number one, like the quality of the work, and I suppose the constant, almost, to the detriment of everything else, including our commercials, trying to make the work as best as possible, because everything else will sort itself out. That's number one. And then number two would be the length of the client relationship. So, the likes of, say, the Energies and the Threes and a whole host of other people who've been on there on the journey. Like, yeah, I really value the fact that we've I think done really good business for their businesses. So it's those things, yeah.
You come across, Pat, as somebody where people really matter to you. People that you work with, obviously people that you work for, in the sense of your clients in that sense. And that's very evident in the chat we're having. How was COVID challenging in your company in the last period of time?
That's a great question. You could have hit me at a sensitive time here, Tim. Like, for me, I think I said earlier on, I get most of my enjoyment and power from being in a room with people. Now, I have surprised myself in terms of, like, you can get, like, I feel like talking to you now, I feel like we have a bit of connection here, right? I think, you can get some sense of energy, but I miss that sense in a room, whereby, you're trying to give the best account of an idea or a strategy or something like that. And, it's somewhere between a conscious performance and whatever else. And you're just trying to convey something as strongly as possible. I miss that. I miss the incidental conversations that are seemingly unimportant, with a client or a colleague, where actually it's really important because you picked up on something good or something bad, or an opportunity or something, like, are they okay? Oh, that's interesting, or like overhearing someone even over a cup of coffee and they're talking about a particular idea, and you go, well, don't worry about that, like trying to remove some of their concerns, or probably I'm worse at going, what about this? Shut up, Pat, will you? But like, so that kind of stuff has been difficult, and I think, I've definitely missed it. But at the same time, look, you've got to look at the positives in terms of, I've had a year, I've spent more time with my kids than I probably would have contended with at an age where, they still think I'm, not a total loser. Let's see what happens when they hit teenage years. And in terms of how, like, we've had some good successes last year in terms of, like, new business. We picked up some really interesting accounts. We had, like, a big account win over in the UK, something I never thought would have been possible, and pitched us, from start to finish, on this thing on the screen. Like, if you'd asked me, in 2019, is it possible? I might have said yes, probably wouldn't have. So.
It's interesting. I'm thinking back to earlier on, you said that you did some acting at different stages and presenting in college in particular. And, what I sort of, my visualization of what you just said about the pivot that you had to make from the face-to-face world, which we all really enjoy, into the video conferencing world, is like being on stage as an actor where you can see the audience, or being in a film as an actor where you don't see the audience and you still have to make the same impression, which is really a challenge. And that's why, obviously, there are some great actors who can cross both, and there's some great businesses like yours who can cross both.
Yeah.
Tell me about the way forward. What are you looking forward to?
What am I looking forward to on a personal basis? On a personal basis, I'm really looking forward to just that little bit more surety of as to what's possible and allowed. So I think we're all kind of planning on a medium term basis, and I never particularly like that. I prefer to have kind of sort of a long term plan and kind of adjust as you go. Um, we've got loads of very exciting things going on within the business, which you can talk about or not talk about. But in terms of new developments, like I think we ended up having an okay year last year, but we had a really good year in terms of our thinking for our long term future identity. So we identified a couple of opportunities and a couple of threats, and we've got some new propositions that'll be coming out in the market in the near future. So that's going to be really, really exciting. And on a personal basis, right now, I'd like to get in the Dublin Mountains or in Wicklow, just into a bit of, I miss swimming in the sea, all that kind of stuff, because that's where I get a lot of my, once I'm in nature in the wilds, I'm very happy. I do with my family or some friends, so I miss that. And some heat would be nice too, But yeah, look, I suppose, and really importantly, getting back into some kind of collective environment. Like we were lucky enough, we had a summer party with the guys in our car park, social distance, all that kind of stuff last year. But it was just amazing because obviously, when you're like, I love boys and girls and all that kind of stuff, and I'm very invested in every aspect of my thing. But like, it was so wonderful to see the joy in everyone's faces, just seeing each other and hanging out with each other and having a couple of drinks. And I miss that. And I can't wait for the first opportunity for us to do that. But even with clients as well, like, I have clients who have become friends at this stage. And, just to be able to shoot the breeze with them and whatever, have a couple of drinks and all that kind of stuff, it's going to be great, yeah.
Well, I've no doubt, Pat, it's going to be great. I'm looking forward to watching the new innovations from your company that you bring to the market over the next period of time. From the honest player in Gonzaga who made his way into the junior team, right through your career. Obviously, people matter to you all the way through, and that to me is why you've been so successful to date and why you will continue to be successful. I'm also impressed the fact that you've still managed your creativity. I love the fact you talk about the car park and the buzz that you had in that sense. It's been an absolute pleasure chatting to you today, Pat, on the Mindset Shift, and thank you very much for taking the time to join us.
Well, Tim, thank you very much. I'm definitely going to get a slagging from the Gonzaga rugby commentary, but other than that, I've really enjoyed it. So thank you very much.
Thank you for watching The Mindset Shift. For more episodes, check out www.talenthub.ie/The Mindset Shift.